So, it seems like Trump's maximum pressure campaign that he touted much about is failing in the case of Iran. Things are dramatically changing in the Middle East. There are a couple of important updates that I have discussed in the previous lectures as well. So be sure to tune into our channel KIPS CSS network and view all our videos that are relevant to your current affairs, essay and Pakistan affairs syllabus, and that will greatly help you in order to sharpen your skills and secure more marks in your upcoming CE 2021 examination. So let's see how Trump's pressure campaign has been failing. But before that, we need to see some history in this context. And this history concerns the US withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, also known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, or JCPOA. Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal in 2018, citing a number of reasons. What he mentioned as reasons are different from what the reasons in reality are. So let's go over those reasons. Well, first of all, Obama, the former 44th president of the United States, left a very strong and a very, I would say, achievement-filled legacy in the office of the President of the United States. And that naturally means that Trump would have to live up to that expectations or even go beyond that. But it became quite clear after the election that he was simply not capable of doing that. So instead, the strategy that he adopted was to undo Obama's legacy, and he did that in a number of ways, especially in the international relations and foreign policy area, in which he withdrew from America from the Iran nuclear deal, from the Paris Climate Accord, from the Trans-Pacific Partnership, from the NAFTA, and a couple of other multilateral international initiatives to reform American foreign policy from one of international cooperation, multilateralism, to isolationism. And secondly, Iran's ballistic missile program was rapidly developing. Despite the fact that Iran was part of the Iran nuclear deal, the deal did not cover any missile systems, any ICBMs, which Iran was developing even prior to the deal. And after the deal, due to economic relief, Iran was able to build even more powerful arsenal of ballistic missiles that were a direct threat to not only Saudi Arabia but also to Israel, which both of them are very close allies of the United States. Therefore, they pushed and lobbied for Trump to actually undo the Iran nuclear deal. Thirdly, Iran's regional clout was substantially increasing in the coming years, especially after the nuclear deal. After the normalization of Iran's ties with the rest of the world, it was able to expand its influence in the Middle East at a much faster rate, all the way in Iraq, in Baghdad, in Syria, in Lebanon, in the shape of Shia militias all over Iraq and Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, Hamas in Palestine, Houthi rebels in Yemen, and other important Shia militias and groups in Libya. So all across the Muslim world, Iran has been constantly expanding its clout, its influence, and becoming increasingly powerful and a national security threat to Saudi Arabia, to other Gulf monarchies such as the UAE, and obviously to the Israeli Zionist state. And finally, Saudi, other Gulf states, and Israeli fears vis-a-vis Iran are one of the most important reasons why Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, to once again undermine Iranian economy, Iranian state, the Islamic Republic, and prevent it from becoming existential threat to the regimes in Israel, in Saudi Arabia, and United Arab Emirates, and other Gulf countries. So in response to all of these threats and reasons, Donald Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal. He reimposed US sanctions upon Iran. Then he sought to reimpose international and European Union sanctions upon Iran, in which naturally he failed. And he also tried to internationally and diplomatically isolate Iran. A good example of that is the withdrawal of India from infrastructure, investment, and strategic partnership agreements with Iran. After the US withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, India also withdrew from all of its commitments in Iran. Thirdly, Trump and Trump's America also conducted surgical strikes against important Iranian assets and targets, such as the strike that killed the Quds Force commander Qassim Soleimani, and other important heads of the armed forces, the Revolutionary Guard Corps of Iran, in that strike. Moreover, America has also targeted other important installments of Iranian military and civilian equipments all around Iran and around the region in an effort to undermine Iran's army, Iran's capabilities and Iran's clout in the region. So, how is Trump's maximum pressure campaign failing? That is a critical question. Well, first of all, immediately after Trump withdrew from the Iran nuclear deal, other partners of the Iran nuclear deal, such as China, Russia, and the United States' own allies, the European Union, Britain, France, Germany, they all outrightly condemned Trump and the United States for withdrawing from the Iran nuclear deal, citing that international agreements must be fulfilled by responsible states, in which case the United States emerged as an irresponsible and untrustworthy state. Moreover, in an effort to remain party to the nuclear deal and to preserve the Iran nuclear deal, the European Union promised to find alternative ways to keep its business with Iran while also escaping and avoiding US sanctions, to create alternative financial channels to achieve that. Secondly, Iran, immediately after the withdrawal, actually threatened to restart its nuclear program, and it to an extent also did that, but there was nothing that the United States could do about it. Its maximum pressure campaign was completely failing in that regard, from preventing Iran to restarting its nuclear weapon program, which was the reason for the Iran nuclear deal in the first place. Thirdly, Iran has not bowed down to the US pressure and agreed to come onto the negotiation table to create a deal that would be more fairer to the United States and the world interest, according to the Trump administration. Iran completely rejected the idea and kept on its foot and held its own in this maximum pressure campaign, and did not bow down and let America achieve its most important objective of this maximum pressure campaign, to basically pushing Iran to compromise and create a new deal that is more conducive to American interests. Fourthly, I think due to the massive economic sanctions, US sanctions, which are very damaging to the Iranian economy, there was massive protests and mass movements against the government in 2019, 2018, which the US hoped would topple the regime, or at least create enough political stability for the US to allow it to do some kind of surgical strike, or have a regime change operation in Iran. None of those hopes and dreams were actually realized, and the Iranian Republic, the Iranian Islamic State, was able to contain those protests and in an amicable way. On a fifth level, I think, despite the fact that Iran did get a little internationally isolated due to US efforts, China replaced India as a much more reliable and a much more wealthy partner to Iran than India could ever hope to be, and the strategic comprehensive alignment that happened between Iran and China goes much beyond any relationship that Iran has had with any Western country recently, even after the Iran nuclear deal, which means this also means an important message from China to the United States, which is clearly saying that we do not care about your sanctions, we are already in a trade war with you, and you are suffering more from that trade war than we are, which is why we are not afraid to conduct business where our strategic interests are promoted rather than being threatened by your sanctions. So that is a very important undercutting of US influence in the world that China is continuously doing all around the region by completely ignoring US foreign policy in that region and fulfilling its own objectives within the broader paradigm of the Belt and Road Initiative. On another level, despite US efforts, Iran's regional clout has not substantially decreased or has not been damaged, and that is quite clear from the recent Israel-UAE deal, which was in reality not a deal to preserve the peace in Palestine and to prevent the annexation of the Palestinian land. In reality, it was a it was a marriage of convenience, and the age-old phrase is very particularly relevant here, which says that the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So Israel is the enemy of UAE's enemy, which is Iran, which is why it is its friend. So This is a clear indication that the US has been unable to contain the clout and the regional influence and emerging power of Iran, which is why the UAE felt increasingly threatened by Iranian influence and wanted to back its effort to contain Iran by signing a deal with Israel Zionist state. And now, lastly, yesterday, Iran's military announced the development and the successful testing of two ballistic missiles, which were appropriately named after Qassim Soleimani and Abu Mahdi, both of which were very high-ranking officials within the Iranian army, which were killed by that strike in which Qassim Soleimani also died. So it is quite clear that Iran is very aggressive and assertive in this matter and refuses to bow down, and Trump's maximum pressure campaign to a large extent has failed, so much so that Trump has decided not to pursue the Iranian question anymore because he has not achieved any progress there, which would mean that that will be a foreign policy failure for Trump and very damaging to his election campaign in the upcoming November 2020 American elections. Thank you very much for your patience. Keep tuned in. Allah Hafiz.